Suska, S-U-S-K-A, 6810 11th Avenue West, Bradenton, Florida. Phone 813-792-5282 at his home, Saturday, February the 25th, 1989, and Helen Earley of the Oldsmobile History Center. Tape 1 of 2 tapes. We want to get your career on tape.
Oh,
Whatever, Bill, you can think of. So you tell me who you are and we'll take it from there.
well, I'm Bill Suska. And I started working at Oldsmobile in, was that? In August of 25th, 1924. Started in as a millwright helper.
What you were hired in at, what were you earning? But 40?
Pardon?
Were you earning 40, 50 cents an hour? You remember what you started at?
I was working for 50 cents an hour.
Who'd you work for?
Gosh, I can't think of his name.
Well, what building did you work in?
It was in the maintenance building. In the building 40, I think it was.
Okay.
That's been a long time ago.
You worked with the millwrights?
Pardon?
You worked with the millwrights?
I worked with the millwrights.
What do they do?
I ended up, well, I took machinery off box cars, flat cars, and shuttled them into in a 6 motor plant.
Where was that located?
In the 6 motor plant building. I can't remember. It's the first building towards Elm Street.
Building 28?
Building 28, yeah.
Now, what kind of machinery did you take off?
Oh, there were cylinder block machines and flywheel machines, connecting rod machines. We were replacing old machines with newer ones. And we had to use crowbars to shove them into the plant.
You didn't have any forklift trucks?
We didn't have no power trucks then. This was all back
Manual
chain fall, snaking them in with pipes and skids and a crowbar. I was on the end of a crowbar. Well, I found out that was pretty risky business. I decided I'm going to get out of there, so I got a job working in a bearing department, drilling bearings.
What year was that?
Oh, that was about 1926. And,
so you were just worked in that millwright area for a few months?
Well, just a few months.
Okay.
But when I started working there for hourly, then I went in on bonus. I got in on the bonus, which is like similar to piecework.
When was that?
That was in 1926.
When you went in on the from the millwrights?
No, I was working in a drilling bearings for the motors in the 6 motor plant.
Then you went on to the bonus program.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then I figured, then I went over on the assembly line, stopped working on assembling cars for Bud Brandl was the superintendent then.
When was that? Do you remember?
About 1925, somewhere in that, 25, 26. Then I got laid off. I got laid off for a few months and then I got back in. They hired me as a ball player. And they gave me a job timekeeping.
What building was that in?
In 28, in the 6 motor plant.
Okay.
And I kept time there for, about 6, 7 years.
What did
I
you,
worked for Earl Schoen then.
okay, yeah,
Charlie Winnicky was my boss. And
what were you earning?
what was I earning? About 55 cents an hour.
Okay,
And, cause then that was, shut it up.
yes, you were in the time department, building 28 on the 6-cylinder engine, you said. Who was your supervisor there?
Pardon?
Who was your supervisor?
In the time office? Well, I worked for Charlie Winnicky then. He
Then?
was in charge of timekeepers.
Okay,
And then,
who was the superintendent?
pardon?
Who was the superintendent?
Well, we didn't have any superintendent. We worked for Earl Schoen was the head of it. He was the comptroller.
Okay,
And,
and this was still about 1926, 27?
well, it was between, sometime in, 28, 29,
Okay,
30,
just before the Depression?
31. And then, there was a time when work was so slack that they made us do maintenance work in the factory, tarring roofs. Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, we would be writing time, and Thursday and Friday, we would be repairing roofs of the buildings, spreading hot tar and putting new tar paper on the roofs.
Was that in the Depression, 1929, 1930,
Yeah, it was in the
31?
Depression days.
I see.
And if we didn't do that, we would be out painting sash on buildings or picking weeds off the railroad tracks and straightening up the railroad tracks and anything to get 8 hours work. And,
How many of you were doing that? Do you remember?
well, it was a lot of the foremen in the factory and some of the fellows that had charge of tool cribs. They kept us working while the factory was down. They only built cars about 3 days a week. And the rest of the time, why, there were superintendents and foremen and assistant foremen working on maintenance work, repairing certain things around the plant, which was pretty rough days. And then the city, the banks were closed, and there was no way we could get our checks cashed until the money would be brought into the Bank and Trust, is American Trust.
Bank and Trust?
And paymaster at that time was, oh golly, what was his name? Anyway, he would go in a cage in the bank and cash our checks. That was the only way we'd get money. That was when Lansing was on scrip. The banks were closed. It was pretty rough going them days.
So this old paymaster would have access to get into the.
Dane Hoover was the paymaster.
Okay, he could go down to the bank and get behind a.
Then he would
cage.
cash our checks.
You would come up there and hand him your check and he'd give you cash?
Right.
I see.
That's the only way there was cash in the city of Lansing. Well, the banks in Michigan were closed. The hard part of it was children were going to school those days and they had savings accounts and they couldn't get their money because the banks didn't have any money for them to make a run on the banks. Well, that was the Depression days.
Remember how much you were earning? How much, if you'd cash your check for 2 weeks, what amount of money would you get out?
Well, it would be about, 8 times 5, $40, $50 a week. Those days, we used to get paid on the 6th and the 21st of the month.
Okay.
And then the job I had, after I got things going a little better, I was promoted to in charge of the timekeepers, and I had to deliver the salary paychecks to the superintendents and foremen in the plant. And I think about that time, there would be about, somewhere in the neighborhood, about 60 people would be involved. They were the only ones that got a check once a month, or twice a month, the 15th and the 31st.
Well, what time was that, 1933?
Well, 32, 33, somewhere in there.
Were you still working on the building 28?
Yeah. And then they finally asked me to come to the office. They wanted me to go into the accounting department. And I told them, I says, go out, being out in the factory, roaming all around all day long. I says, I couldn't see my way of going sit behind a desk for 8 hours a day. I'd probably go crazy.
Who asked you to come to work in the office? You remember who you talked with?
Well, it was Mr. Schoen.
Okay, now his office was in
building 60.
Building 60, okay.
So I decided, well, I might as well go and get that job up there in the county. That way I could be on salary. So the first vacation I got a week's vacation with pay, and I didn't even know what to do with myself. Because when you're working on salary, you would get a paycheck. But when you're working hourly, well, you had to put the hours in order to get paid.
Well, what were you doing in the accounting department? What kind of?
It was cost accounting. I kept track of records. And
cost accounting on parts or automobiles or supplies?
Well, I got into a section where we worked on budgets. We had keep track of the cost of what it cost to operate the factory from day to day. Those were records that were set up by the accounting sections.
Who was your supervisor then, Bill?
George Green. I worked for him for about 2 years. And then the war came on.
Was that on the second or the fourth floor of Building 60?
What?
Is that the second floor or?
Second war.
No, I mean the second floor or the fourth floor. Where was your office?
Top floor, third floor.
Third floor.
And then the war came on, and so we converted into an armament plant. We stopped making automobiles, and that was from 41 until 46. And I worked in the, we kept records of war contracts. I worked his name was Paul Hennessy. I worked for him.
Paul Hennessy?
Yeah, Paul Hennessy.
Okay.
And
did you still physically stay in the same office where you had worked?
Well, we just shuffled from one place to another. It all came on the accounting section anyway.
It was still in Building 60.
It's still Building 60.
Right.
And then
so all during the war, you
all during the war years. And after the war, we sat around wondering what we were going to do, because we didn't know when we'd be able to get back to making cars again, because we didn't know where the tools were over the years of 5 or 6 years. And how we got started working on cars is what a mystery to me. But then I had a chance to go into the purchasing department.
When was that?
In 1940. Well, I went to work in the purchasing department in 1957.
1957. But what did you do after the war?
After the war, I worked in the purchasing department. I worked for Van Ness.
Okay, what were you doing?
Well, I first started working for Ken Mix.
Ken Mix. Okay, what was his title? Do you remember?
He was a buyer for past model parts.
Okay.
And so I was expediting past model parts for the parts department, which came under the purchasing department.
Okay.
And after spending 20 years in the accounting section, I got into the purchasing department, spent the last 20 years in the purchasing department. I found out it was much better spending the money than it was to account for the money.
How long did you work for Ken Mix, expediting?
Oh, I worked for Ken Mix about 3-4 years. Then he transferred out of the purchasing department, went over to the parts department. And as the time went on, why, he ended up as general manager of the parts department.
Who was your boss then after Mix left?
Well, I worked for Goosen, and I had a number of bosses.
Remember?
Well, Van Ness was one of them. And actually, when I retired, Bill Haight was the purchasing director, and he had different heads of departments under him.
Some of those people?
Yeah, well, we worked for Art Radke, and
What did Radke's area head up?
and then I worked for, what's the name, man, of that guy that drank an awful lot?
Fred Wiles?
Who?
Fred Wiles?
No. Well, I got into expediting automotive parts. Oh, I worked for Bob Porter for a while, worked for Joe Vermetti for a while, worked for Don Hulleberger, and I was just jumping from one job to the next in the purchasing department.
This was all under expediting.
Expediting, yeah. And I had different accounts of suppliers who supplied Oldsmobile for productive parts.
So you didn't work on non-productive, you worked on productive parts.
Productive parts, yeah.
I see, okay. Do you remember some of the suppliers you dealt with?
Oh, I got them all here.
Sure we can. We've got the list of your vendors that we can pick off the sheet here, Bill. So you worked on with productive vendors and nothing on non-productive.
Oh, no, it was all productive.
Right, okay. Did you run into any situation sometimes where it was pretty hard to expedite a part in that was crucial?
Well, it was pretty rough going at times. We had to see that the suppliers would meet their schedules to these assembly plants, which we had in California and in Massachusetts and Kansas City and Lansing was the home plant, but we had these BOP plants scattered all over the country. They were building Oldsmobiles, and they needed Oldsmobile parts there too. So our purchasing department in Lansing was a home base for the assembly plants, and they had the schedules to our suppliers had schedules to meet, and so therefore that's why we had to expedite the material from Lansing to the assembly plants that built Oldsmobiles, not Pontiacs and Buicks. So they built three types of cars there: Buicks, Olds, and Pontiacs.
Right.
Well, that was pretty rough going there for a while. We had steel strikes to contend with, and suppliers couldn't supply material because they couldn't get steel. We had to expedite steel for suppliers to make the parts.
How would you go about doing that?
How would we go about doing it? Well, there was a steel shortage. Of course, when you're building cars, you you can't build cars without parts.
Well, would you have advanced knowledge that there was going to be a strike? of
Well,
some
yeah,
kind?
we own the tools, and we made we had the suppliers use the tools that were ours, and if they couldn't supply us, well, we would look for other suppliers and transfer the tools to other suppliers.
Now, what do you mean? We own the tools. Oldsmobile.
Oldsmobile owned the tools.
What kind of tools would
Well,
Oldsmobile
to
own?
fabricate the parts.
What kind of parts?
Well, whatever was needed to build an automobile.
Well, then would you actually?
Actually, what I was handling mostly was fasteners, nuts, bolts, screws, and fasteners for motors and axles and transmissions. We bought the bodies, Fisher Body furnished the bodies, but we had to build the car right from chassis on up. See, we had rubber parts. Any item that was out of rubber, we handled those. And of course, my biggest account was Packard Electric, which was the higher wiring harnesses. That was, there's no two harnesses alike because every type of model car you buy has got different connections of a harness. Some cars were built with air conditioning, which you had to have connectors for air conditioning and directional signals, and they were pretty delicate items and Packard Electric is one of the corporation's divisions. I tried to, because just like our radios and were all Delco appliance, and our air conditioning was all Harrison radiator, and our carburetors were all Rochester products. Those are things that we didn't fabricate in Lansing. We had to go buy them. We had to buy them from outside sources.
So you were buying them from an allied division?
Yeah, allied divisions.
To get back to, say, where you didn't really work on steel yourself.
Oh, no.
See, well, say there was a strike that affected a part that you were expediting. How would you go about handling that? If you could,
Well, we had schedules to send out to our suppliers, and the suppliers would have to meet our schedules, see.
right?
And of course, you can't have everything come in at once because we had storage facilities. We had to have material flowing in as we were building the cars, see. You can't build a car without a motor, or you can't build a car without a frame or wheels. So what we couldn't fabricate in our home plant, we had to go buy
True.
from our suppliers. And we never wanted to put all our orders in one plant because in case a plant broke down, why, there goes our materials. We couldn't get material unless, so we would have to get dual suppliers. Some parts that I handled, I had as high as 5 different suppliers handling certain fastening items. See?
So you would be going, other than an allied division
Oh, yeah,
furnishing that,
yeah.
you would have 3 or 4 outside GM suppliers.
Right.
Well, then to get back to a statement you made a moment ago about the factory would provide tools to a manufacturer. I guess I wasn't clear on that.
Well, in order to, we had to send out orders to our suppliers they would bid on certain jobs, and of course there was always a price angle. We would, you can't make an item unless you make a profit on it. Sometimes the price was too high, so they'd negotiate and either cut the price down or give them more money for the parts. See?
Well, now, you would send, on the bid system, you would send your offer to bid to about 3, 4 different
Well, we would
concerns
put out
of
quotations
quotation.
and pick out the best supplier and the best price.
That, you say price, did quality, that would have to come,
Oh,
consider
quality,
too.
you know, we do it from years' experience,
Dependability.
past experience. Sometimes you get good suppliers and sometimes you get suppliers that couldn't meet your schedule, so we'd
Okay.
cancel them out and look for better suppliers.
Did you ever have a problem with quality on parts?
Well, you always have problems with quality.
Well, does any come to your mind now that you could carry us through on an example?
Well, they always had to submit samples to see if the product that they were producing was approved by our quality control, see.
Okay.
And there for a while, it got pretty rough. There were times when suppliers couldn't meet our schedule and we would be running out of parts. It was up to us to see that the parts was in the plant on time in order to keep the assembly line going. Because that was model after model, year after year. You learn something that you look forward to the following year from experience the past years, that you don't want to repeat them year after year. Well, that's building cars. Now they do it probably different today than when I was there.
Well, we're looking what was happening when you were there.
You know,
Well, see, what happened if a part came in that didn't meet Oldsmobile specifications?
well, at times it got so critical that we had to shut the line down and send everybody home. We didn't want that to happen.
Well, you mean, this would, I'm not talking about a shortage of a part, but I'm talking about, suppose a part had already been approved by Oldsmobile Quality Control, and yet when the quantity came in, did you ever run into a situation where that quantity delivery was different than the sample that had been
Oh,
approved?
no.
Never run into that?
No, we don't run into that.
Okay. Okay.
There were times when I used to have planes fly in some of that material because we ran so short.
Why would you run so short?
Well, I lost count of them or misplaced them.
Now, what department's job was it to keep on top of a situation
Well,
like
material control handled that, but then our traffic department saw to it that the material was on hand in order to keep from shutting the line down.
that? Do you remember any incidences when you?
The only time we ran into difficulties was here at the tail end of the model run. We would be running pretty close to having all the parts available in order to finish the completion of the model year. What we wouldn't have, we would always depend on parts department to furnish us enough material to build, finish up the cars that we were building. And the model is done, it's done till the next model comes out the following year. When I first started working there, why, the model year would end up sometime in October, and then we wouldn't start up again until January. So we'd build cars from January to October, and then that's the end of the model, and then we'd shut down for 3 months and repair all our equipment in the plant and start up on the new model again. But that was way back years ago.
Like in the 20s?
Yeah, in the 20s.
Okay.
As the way they operate now, I guess a car can go by you on the assembly line, a car every minute. Well, when I first started working in there, we were lucky to build 100,000 cars for a model year, but we didn't have so many different models them days as they do now. See?
Okay.
How they're operating now, I don't know. I haven't been inside the factory in the last 20 years, so
But,
it's push button now. See?
right. What, do you remember the highest production year while you were there?
Oh, no, I can't remember. The thing that amazes me is how in the world we could have quit building cars and turn around and making armament parts, making cannons and automatic guns and shells. And actually, we converted from automotive to war materials. And
Very
then,
quickly, didn't we?
yeah, in no time, we just changed the plant from automotive to armament, and then from armament back to automotive again, which was quite a revelation in my days.
Bill, you remember now you worked for Harold Hidley? Did you?
Well, he was one of my,
What kind of a man was he to work with?
highly, very, very pleasant, very nice, very nice. I had wonderful supervisions. I was easier to get along with. I put in 44 years in there, and not once was I threatened to get fired.
Oh, there's a lot for
So
you.
I got a lot to be thankful for.
What about, did you work with Art Radke?
Oh, I worked for him. He was one of my supervisors.
Mhm.
Or whatever department I worked in, I must have had about 10 supervisors. And they were,
Abe Goosen too.
oh yeah, he was the head of he was the director of purchases.
Do you remember any of the vendors personally?
Who?
Any of the vendors personally that you might have had any difficulty
Oh,
with, or
gosh.
comical incidents, or?
You mean all suppliers?
Yes.
Oh, I had,
I mean, something is kind of a funny incident, or
Well, the most outstanding vendor I handled was Ring Screw Works, who supplied us with fasteners. They were one of the greatest companies I ever dealt with. There was Michigan Screw was another company, Tom Robinson. These are cold heading plants that made whole bolts, you know.
Cold heading?
Cold headed bolts.
Now, what's
Years ago, they used to make them on screw machines. Now they cold head them and knock them out like peanuts today.
what is you mean by cold heading?
Well, they take a round piece of coiled stock and they smash them into a sized bolt and head them and thread them all in a series of operations.
But it's not heated. It's all
Oh,
cold.
yeah, some of them are a certain type of it's a metallurgical process, heat treated. They have to come up to a specification. This is all planned out by engineering. They engineer it, and then we get the suppliers to fabricate it. So we are, they are our peddlers, and we are the buyers.
You remember any interesting incidents with a peddler or any unusual personalities with a peddler?
Well, let's see.
Whitey, bullet stuffing? Would that be interesting?
Well, one of my suppliers, I want to know if
So, didn't you go out and play golf and I come home and cooked it, opened up the refrigerator and
oh,
cooked
one of my suppliers, he knew that Easter was coming, and so he was out of Detroit. He was on his way to Lansing, and he stopped at some Polish meat market and brought in some Polish kielbasa so that I could have it for Easter.
And this
And
is what I was thinking. Put it in our refrigerator, was gonna take it with him.
well, he brought some to take over to some friends that he had in Lansing, and we were going to play golf. Thought, well, some of this stuff in the refrigerator, keep from spoiling it. And when Anna came home from work, she opened the refrigerator and she couldn't figure out who in the world put all that Polish sausage in the refrigerator. Oh, there was a number of incidences that I could come up with, but I can't pinpoint anything right now.
Where was your office in building 70?
It was on the main floor there, right? You know, as you come in from the lobby there, that's where I ended up.
Okay.
I think that's that new one now.
Yes, building 70.
70.
Mhm.
Well, there's a lot of waters going over the dams. I could tell you a number of things that took place, but
Well, whatever comes to your mind, Bill, is interesting because it's different than it's happening now. That's what we want to try to capture.
well, let's see. Well, going way back, I can remember the Logan Street Bridge was being built, and the thing collapsed.
That was in the late 20s, wasn't it?
Crawford Dam broke down, and
About 1927, 28?
Yeah, about 28, which was a tragic thing that happened. Then another thing that I experienced,
Was there anyone injured or killed in that?
oh, there was quite a few that drowned, that got killed. Yeah, they're still down there. Never did get them. Then the other thing that took place before that was the disaster in Bath when the school was,
Mr. Kehoe.
yeah, Kehoe.
Well, now, to get back to Logan Street Bridge, had there been a bridge across the river?
Oh, yeah, it was an old, dilapidated bridge.
But the city was building this bridge. Olds didn't have anything to do with it.
No, this is a second new bridge now.
True. Okay. Oh, Bill, when you first came there, now, do you remember any new buildings that came up in the plant while you were there? There's been a lot of houses along Old Bath.
Oh, yeah, on Townsend Street, they moved all those houses out of there and put up Building 60. I can remember when they built that.
Well,
Yeah. And the employment office on Old Avenue, wasn't it?
employment office was in the southwest corner of Building 60.
Oh,
But before that, I don't know where it was.
well, it was at the end of, oh, it used to be a Syrian settlement there.
Right there is at the foot.
Oh,
Elm Street is at the foot of the
Elm Street coming into the,
plant.
from Washington Avenue.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the player, wasn't it?
Well,
About that.
yeah, and a lot of baseball, and I've done a lot of bowling, and
But you mentioned at the start of, that you were hired in to the Olds because of your,
baseball team, and
they hadn't had one before that.
oh, no. Well, city league there that was body,
Real in there?
worked at the Rio for 2 years. Stock chaser in the paint department. They used to paint their bodies by hand.
How would they do that?
Well, what?
It was quite a skilled job though, wasn't it?
Well, it just on the push carts and they'd paint them by hand. They were color varnishes. They used to paint those bodies, well, they used to put about 13, 14 coats on their primers, and then they put them on rubbing decks and rub them. And,
Between coats?
yeah. Then they put finishing coats on, and they,
13, 14 coats of lacquer would go on a vehicle? Now, would this be after the car was entirely assembled?
no, the body would be on a chassis,
I see.
and I had to see that the paint department had the supplies to paint the bodies.
Well, how long would it take, would two men paint a car or
Oh, no.
one person
No.
work on it all by himself?
That would be one man would paint. He would paint two bodies in the morning and 2 bodies in the afternoon. And they would paint 4 bodies a day. That
Okay,
was,
now how long would it take that paint to dry before the rub down people could get to it?
it was a matter of few hours.
Okay, and then after the first you said there's a primer coat goes on. First a primer coat, then that would have to dry.
You know,
Was that rubbed down?
yeah, that would rub it out. See?
That would rub down, and then another coat of paint, the first coat of paint would go on, then that would dry and be rubbed down,
Right.
then
It would be just like painting furniture. See?
yeah, and you'd put 13 or 14 coats on the same, over the, that was quite a lengthy process, that
Oh,
was painting a vehicle.
Long, tedious job. Well, there wasn't very many people who were able to buy those kind of cars them days.
No. Did all of the automobile companies, was also, or Fisher Body going through the same process, do you think, on the paint?
We used to, well, Rio used to buy their bodies from the auto body in Lansing.
Right.
This is long before Fisher Body was even in the body business.
Oh, yes. They came in 1923.
Yeah.
Okay. When you remember, so you worked at Rio for 2 years, as a stock chaser all the time?
No, I went down and I started working on machines. I was a gear cutter. I worked on machines that cut gears for the transmission. They made their own transmission, the Rio did.
Oh. Okay. Do you remember what you were earning? What wage you got?
Well, it was piecework, and you could only make so much a day. If you made too much money, why, they would cut the piece price.
I see.
So I had to have a bank so that in case my machine broke down, well, I could turn in pieces that I had saved up in reserve until my machine would be repaired.
Oh, yeah.
So, but we weren't making big wages those days. It's the living wage.
What were working conditions?
They were very close knit. It was R.E. Olds and Dick Scott actually ran the real motor car company.
Old down in the plant
Oh,
office?
yes, yeah. That was in 1921 and 22, which is a long time ago.
Sure is.
That's when people used to go to work on streetcars, and they used to run streetcars up and down Washington Avenue.
Is that the way you got to work?
That's the way people used to do. Yeah. I never had an automobile until I was, first car I had was in 1927. First car I bought was a 1927 model. It was a 5-passenger, 2-door job, and
What brand of car? What make of car?
it was Oldsmobile. I paid $510.10 for that car, and I drove it for 10 years. If it wasn't for my brother-in-law, he was a mechanic. He kept the thing running for me. And, I think I sold it for $50, and I sold it for junk.
Well, what decided you to leave the Rio and to come to Old?
Well, I was offered a better job. So when I first went to work at Oldsmobile, you could have shot a cannon down through the main entrance and not hit a soul, because it was all real ran Lansing them days. And of course, it wasn't Oldsmobile, it was Olds Motor Works. So I thought I was having a steady job. You know, those days, if there was no work, you got laid off. You didn't get in on unemployment them days. There was no such thing as unemployment. If you worked 9 months, you had to save enough money to carry over till the next model run would start, and you'd be called back to work again. Those were pretty rough days. I don't think we'll ever see those kind of days.
We hope not.
Hope not.
Were working conditions better at Oldsmobile than at Rio?
What?
Were working conditions better at
Well,
Olds?
Rio was going down, and of course Oldsmobile was picked up by General Motors, and it looked more promising. Well, at one time, there was a time when I couldn't wait till I got back to work. I enjoyed working because it was like one big happy family. And, of course, the big thing that developed there was when General Motors started the savings investment plan.
Remember when that was?
Oh,
What
that
year?
was, it was started, I think, in 1923. And you could only put in $300 into it, but you had to wait 5 years before it matured. And that was a limit that you could put in. And those days, I was lucky enough to put in $5 a month, which was about $60 for a year. I thought that was quite a savings, to save $60 a year on the wages that I was working for. There were women working in the motor plant that were inspecting fasteners that were only making 40 cents an hour.
Well, this was in 19...
That was in 1926, 27, along those years.
So you had a few women in the plant that early.
Oh, very few, yeah. Yeah, at one time, I can remember there was only one girl that worked inside of the plant at one time, and that was Marion Kohler. She was the secretary to Bud Brandel. She was the only girl that worked inside of the plant. And when I first worked at the Olds, there was only one colored person working in there, and he was a chauffeur for the factory manager.
Who was factory manager then?
Dick Scott was his name, and this colored man was really a gentleman. His name was Clarence Taylor.
Oh, all he did was act as Mr.
And when I first started there, I was more or less a Polish interpreter because there were so many Polish people working in the factory that couldn't express themselves in the American language that I used to have to interpret to these hard-working Polish people that couldn't express themselves to their foreman. They thought that their foreman was God Almighty. That thing today is the thing of the past.
Did you find it difficult to learn the English language? And you still kept up with your Polish language?
Oh, yeah, I was able to get by, but when you don't use it, you lose it.
True.
But I was pretty well versed those days. And they were my real diehard friends. In fact, I got many of them jobs over there because when they go to employment office, the employment man would ask them what they could do, and 9 out of 10, these Polish men would, I'll do anything. They show me how to do it, and I'll do it. And they did.
Now, would that be when you were, working on that, six-cylinder engine,
Well, I was a
the
timekeeper,
timekeeper?
yeah.
Okay. Well, Bill, what about the safety practices in the plant?
Well, the safety features have, no matter how many safety precautions you use, they're still bound to have accidents, and these are foolish accidents. I can remember many of them that happened. I can remember one time there was a fellow by the name of Henges Ball, worked in the press plant on a fender press, which takes 4 men to operate. And it seems that there was a rest period, and he put his arm on one of the pins on the die, and the ram came down and took his arm off. See, and that's just a plain accident. Was all uncalled for. Fatigue is a good word to use. They've come up with some fabulous safety precautions, but they always have accidents, which are foolish things that happen. I remember one time working at the Rio, there was a fellow knocking shavings off a lathe that was turning part of the operation. He was, instead of using a tool of some kind to move the shavings, why he put his finger in there, and he was off. I've warned him time and time again, and sure enough, they came over to me and said, "On Bill, there's some bad accidents." Oh, I don't know if I can think of any more.
Kind of, this is a very interesting interview, Bill.
Well, I wish I could it come to my mind that I can't express.
I understand. We can,
What made Oldsmobile, in my mind, is employees those days had an opportunity to buy their home through the savings investment plan, and who was it? Credited. Now, for instance, like when we bought our first home, our home was $25 a month was our payment, and they would deduct $25 from my check and apply it to my home. And after that was increased over a period of 5 years, I would get a return from the savings investment plan. Like I mentioned before, if you put $300 in, I remember some of the supervisors showed me what they got for their $300 return. In 1923, they got paid $9 for $1. In other words, if they had $300 in, 5 years later, they got $2,700 for that, $300 plus stock in the General Motors stock, and that kept repeating every year. See, if you put in 23, you collected in 27, 28. If you put in 24, you collected in 29. If you put in 25, you collected in 31. See, or 30, see, every 5 years. See. Well, that was one of the reasons why a lot of people bought homes them days, which 90% of those homes on across the river from Grand River, there, Morris Park area, were all Oldsmobile employees. And if people worked at Oldsmobile and bought homes, they were within walking distance of Oldsmobile, and that's why they never would go and get a job at the Rio or go to Motor Wheel. They'd stay with Oldsmobile, see, because they had security there. And then time came where the government wouldn't allow them to operate that way, so General Motors cut that out, see. So since then, they came out with another plan, which you could put as much money as you want into a stock savings plan. See, there was one time I was out ready to buy some stock when they got down as low as $10 a share, and I waited for a period of time. There was three of us going to buy $1,000 worth of stock. I carried $300 with me for quite a while, and I was waiting for, was Mike Minnow was going to buy $400 worth, and Eddie Plank was going to buy another $300. So 3 and 3 and 4 would make 10, and make $1,000. And it finally went down to 7.5, and we never did buy it. And that's the lowest that I ever remember General Motors stock going down.
Why didn't you buy it when it got down
We
to
never did
7?
buy it. Come to find out, Mike Minnow never had the $400 to match our
300.
300.
Oh, for heaven's sakes.
And that those days, the only ones that I know of that fooled around with stock would be supervisors. And
Like Earl Schoen or.
well, Earl Schoen has got more money than Carter has pills.
Now, you retired when?
Hmm?
When did you retire?
I retired in '67.
Okay. And you planned to retire?
Well, I actually worked a year longer than I was supposed to. I thought I was retiring at 62, but somewhere along the line, my birth certificate, my birth records were wrong. I thought I was born in 1903, and my records showed that I was born in 1904. So actually, I worked a year longer than I intended to.
And were you born here in?
No, yeah, I was born in Massachusetts.
I see. Okay.
Well, if you want to get a laugh, I'll read some of my highlights. May 1st, 1967. Would you believe that before we get ahead of ourselves, let us go back to the beginning. It was a cold, gray October 7, 1903, in Fall River, Massachusetts, when the fourth child was born to the senior and Mr. or Mrs. The same year of Bill's birth, Olds turned out this classic model car. Bill's folks were especially pleased that the new arrival was a son because in their native Poland, male children were looked upon as, you can see, Bill hasn't changed much in the last 64 years. Bill's childhood was spent in the typical manner of most kids who are brought up in a mill town on the eastern seaboard. His favorite excursions were on the Fall River Portsmouth ferry boat. He attended Slade Street grade school, and at an early age helped with the family financial situation by working in the cotton mills as a bobbin boy. Appreciated by his mother since his father died when Bill was 15 years old. 2 years later, Bill's mother passed on, and he and his older brother Stanley journeyed west to Michigan to live with his older married sister who had settled in Lansing and whose husband Alex had offered Bill and Stanley a home. They came out on a New York Central in 1920, riding a chair car and sustaining themselves from the large lunch basket packed by their kindly neighbor, Mrs. Petrosky. Bill's talent as an athlete were quickly recognized in his early years in Michigan, were spent playing baseball for the then thriving industrial leagues. A good ball player at that time was assured of employment, and Bill played for a number of company teams from the steel mills of River Rouge and Ecorse to Lansing and Windsor, Ontario, and even played with a team from Buick. One of our favorite stories concerning Bill about this time was the game that was played in Windsor, and the payoff was made with good Canadian booze. This was during the height of Prohibition. The highlights of these baseball years was the time Bill played in Cleveland Stadium against Hannes Wagner, and according to Bill's version of the outcome, the local lads were victorious. Bill's brother-in-law, Alex, secured employment for our hero in 1920 at the Real Motor Car Company, and Bill was enrolled in the famous Dye Apprenticeship program, which has many illustrious alumni, not the least of which is Frank Bromley. In August of 1924, Bill switched his allegiance to Oldsmobile because they just happened to need an expert pitcher to fill out a team that was composed of Bud Urquhart, Red Cherry, Lyle Ginter, Frank Wazak, Monk Marvin, Ray Peterson, Bill Mahoney, Paul Haberlin, and Eddie Plank. In 1927, he was contacted by the Detroit Tigers scout to come for a tryout. Being the pitching hero of this immortal crew, it was not unusual that Bill attracted a sizable bevy of interested female fans. His eye was particularly taken with Anna Otis, who had arrived in Lansing from her native Hastings during her high school years. Much courting was done at the Ledges, which at that time had a flourishing amusement park. The two lovebirds decided to build their own nest, and they were married in Hastings on January the 21st, 1928. Shortly after their marriage, Bill was driving this 1927 model car. Notice the classy valve stem caps and the real hot sales feature for that year. This union was blessed with their first son, William Jr., in 1930. Bill at that time living on Kingsley Court, and the story of this event is well known to his close friends, but unfortunately it takes too long to relate in detail at this time. With these new responsibilities, the star of our show decided to spend more time working and less time pitching. The family was just beginning to make their first significant strides when the fateful Depression of 1929-30 occurred and regular hourly work was eliminated entirely. There were a few lean years in this period when Bill did everything from retarring the roof of Building 33 to burning weeds on the Grand Trunk Spur track. along the river's edges of Oldsmobile property. Things took a turn for better in November of 1933. Bill transferred from hourly work to the time department and worked for such upstarts as Earl Schoen and Bill Mahoney. Through these contacts and by diligent application, Bill transferred to the cost department 1 year later. It was about this time that Bill's active interest in baseball faded, and he took up bowling and golf. I might add that Bill ended the 1967 season with the 706 series. Bill is a character member of the Oldsmobile Golf League. There are many stories we could tell you about his exploits on the course, including his hole-in-one at the Lansing Country Club. We do recall an incident when Old's tournament was held at Murraywood Golf Course. It was at this time that Bill did his part for the war effort by establishing the Bill Suska carpool. His riders, for some strange reasons, were always the most attractive girls in the accounting department. Eileen and Jackie and Dorothy, Marie, Louise, and Marilyn became known as Bill's dollies. You can tell that Bill's taste isn't all in his mouth. During the war, Bill had considerable contact with the purchasing department. Since he was now employed in the accounts receiving section, and he was exposed to such plush life as on March 1st, the purchasing department. Mr. Goosen made arrangements for a transfer. He was soon to realize that the grass always looks greener on the other side of the fence. However, he stuck it out, and on December the 1st, 1957, was promoted to Special Expediter Purchasing Department, Oldsmobile Division. By 1961, the children had both left to form their own families, and Bill and Anna had more time to devote to their own pursuits. Bill took up photography, and is at this last count 12,382 slides, and he will be happy to show them to you at the drop of a hat. His interest in photography has in recent years taken him to the far corners of the earth. His pictures of Hawaii taken on their 1966 trip and his most recent sojourn to Mexico City and Acapulco are most enjoyable to both Bill and Anna. This about brings us up to the present. We realize we are guilty of a few omissions here and there. We hope to make up for any oversights with the presentations of gifts from his friends here at Oldsmobile. At this time, we're happy to turn the microphone over to Mr. Van Ness, who will make the first presentation. Amen.
I'm so glad you did that. I think that's just great. That's very nice.
He could have fell through the floor when this came up.
Somebody did a lot of research on your background, didn't they?
I didn't even know that. These are some of the pictures that they took.
Yes.